Hello and welcome to this DDi CADcast from the What's New series. Today we're going to be covering drawings and detailing in 2015. So as I mentioned, the new features for SolidWorks 2015 in the area of detailing and drawings in particular. Now we're going to break this into two parts. There's a number of new enhancements, and what I've done here is just break down a real simple list of the things that I want to cover in this part 1 of the new features for 2015 in drawings and detailing. We got new functionality for what we're calling drawing zones, some enhancements to center marks and center lines, some dimension enhancements, slice section view support for surface bodies, and also a new zoom to sheet command. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. So probably one of the biggest enhancements is the enhancement of drawing zones to drawings. And it adds a lot of functionality that's been requested for years in drawings, and it's specifically location information. So jumping into a drawing here, one of the often requested questions that we get is, is it possible to add a note showing the location of a drawing view? And the answer has always been you create a text note and you type in the location, but the problem with that is pretty obvious. Once the drawing view moves, obviously that text note is no longer up to date. So it was always just a text string and a note. Now we actually have drawing zone functionality, which allows us to identify the location of views within a drawing. So there's a couple of elements to this. I want to point out a few different things to drawing zones. One of the first things that you'll see is a new annotation called a location label. And a location label, like the name implies, just merely adds a note giving you the location information. So I can select, for instance, this detail view and of course the actual corresponding view, and it adds a note giving me the location info for each. Okay? So it's a nice tool to be able to identify where the location is of the detail, for instance, especially if I decide to move it to a second sheet. So let me show you here what happens. This is referencing the detail view, which you'll see is in B1 here, reference the note. When I drag the detail view into the second sheet, you'll see the note updates. So that's the big thing here, is it's a live updating thing. If you move drawing views around, the location information updates. So you'll see now it's sheet 2, zone B1. I'm going to go over to sheet 2, and if I move this once again, come back, you'll see that now it's sheet 2, zone E6. So this zone information is always updating based on the drawing template. So I want to get into some things that we can do to adjust this. There's a pretty good chance that you're going to have to adjust it to match your template. So one of the first things I want to point out is the ability to turn on the zone lines. So in 2015 under View, you're going to see a new option for zone lines. And all that does is it turns on a series of dashed lines showing you the drawing zones. The big thing here is obviously you're going to have to make sure these zone lines match up to your actual definition in your template. To modify your zone lines, you have to edit your template. So it's important to note that in 2015, if you want the zone functionality to work, there's a pretty good chance you'll have to modify the template, edit your zone lines, and save the template again. So I'm going to show you how to edit the zone lines. You just right-click anywhere on the drawing sheet. You go to Properties, and you'll see a new tab for Zone Parameters. So it's pretty straightforward. How do you want the zones distributed? You can say 50 millimeters from center every 50 millimeters, or you can give it a number. So for instance, I can set this to 6 and 7, and you'll see it tells me you're about to change the number of zones. The number placement identifiers in your sheet format will not adjust, and what that means is all this information that you have built into your sheet format, the number identifiers on the right and top, will not automatically update. And that's important to note because it often means two steps in this. You have to update your zone lines and you have to update your sheet format to match them. So I say OK to this. I say yes, OK to this as well. OK to the command, and now you'll see my zone lines no longer match up to my sheet format. I have more zone lines. So this is the steps you're going to have to modify the zone lines to match your number scheme, your column scheme. Right? So it's an important thing to note. You'll go to the properties, zone parameters, and edit those values. Okay. So that's how you'd edit zone information. It's important to note after you do that, you will have to save this as a template to ensure that you don't have to do this every time. So that's one of the important changes that you'll need. One last bit of information I want to mention regarding zones is the fact that you can link to them in notes. When you create a note, you're going to see a new dialog here for add zone. And it's a pretty straightforward thing. It brings up a window and it asks you, what do you want to add? And you can simply add the zone that that note is in. That's the default. Or you can tell it what column or row if you want to get more specific. Or you can set it to the drawing zone of a particular view. So if you have, drawing view 3 and you want to know what zone it's on, you can set it to note, set it to drawing view 3, and then it will give you the zone information for that particular drawing view. So it's a property within the drawing. It can be linked to in notes and so on. So definitely one of the neater enhancements for drawings in this particular release is this functionality for drawing zones. Alright, so let's move on to the next thing in our list, and those are the enhancements to center marks and center lines in drawings. So let's jump right into it. Now, a few of the neat things in the center mark enhancements are to how we handle center mark sets. And I want to take a moment to explain these, so I'm going to go ahead and open this model up and make a simple change to it, just to kind of illustrate one of the bigger enhancements for center marks. I'm going to go ahead and delete one of these holes, and I'm going to add 2 more. Now, if you've ever done this, you'll know that when you go back to your drawing, of course, that's going to create an issue with the previous center mark. So you'll see here I have a dangling center mark. And in the past, there's been no easy way to reattach that to a new hole once it's been created. Now what you'll notice in 2015 is when you right click a center mark, you're going to see a reattach option. Okay? And I can of course reattach it to a new circle. So again, one of the bigger enhancements for this release, no need to recreate the center mark set. You can simply reattach the dangling reference. Also new is the ability to right click and add to a center mark set. So if you add more holes to a center mark set, you can add more center marks to that set. Okay. Just meant to eliminate a lot of that delete and recreate functionality or recreate workflow that a lot of people have been using. So those are some of the center mark enhancements. The next enhancements I want to get into are to center lines. One of the big ones I think for center lines is better support for things like relationships. So I'm going to add a center line to this part, so I'm going to add a center line here. Is now when you sketch a line, you can now create a relationship between the line and a center line. You'll see a center line is a selectable entity now when you're trying to create a constraint. That was not the case in the past, so you couldn't really tie any kind of lines to center lines or any kind of some of the other annotation types. So really useful, especially when you're trying to get an exact section view, for instance, and you want to draw the line in. It's really nice to be able to attach and create relationships to annotations, in this case a center line. So that's one of the new enhancements. One of the other ones that's big is the ability to attach annotations to a center line. So I can attach the annotation leader, for instance, for a note. I can actually attach it to the center line. Right? So kind of neat functionality. Again, couldn't do this in the past, attach an actual annotation to a center line. So those are some of the enhancements to center marks and center lines. Let's move on. So the next enhancements I want to focus on are in the area of dimensions. So let's jump right into it. One of the first things I want to point out is an enhancement to rounding and how decimals are rounded in SolidWorks. Now, in previous versions, it was a pretty much standard that it always rounded along the typical fashion. In other words, 0.25, for instance, rounds to 68.3. If it were 68.24, it'd round down to 68.2. Now we have a little bit more control over those options. So in the document properties, under units, you will see decimal rounding options. And in particular, round half away from 0, which is the default, right? Round half towards 0. So if I had 0.25, that would round down to 0.2. Round half to even, and then truncate without rounding. So just a little bit more control over how decimal rounding works. For instance, if I set this to round half to 0, I hit OK, this value, this 68.3 that I've highlighted, will round down to 68.2. Okay? So just a little bit more control over how your dimensions are rounded. The next enhancement to dimensions that I want to point out is in the area of angle dimensions. When you select an edge or a line, this also works in the sketch mode when you're sketching. When you select an angled line and its end point, you automatically get a triad showing you vertical and horizontal references. And a lot of this just means that I don't have to sketch a vertical center line, for instance, just to get the angle of that line. I can just simply select the vertical reference in the triad. So it's much easier than drawing construction geometry just to add an angle dimension. So that's a new enhancement to angle dimensions. The last one I want to point out is an enhancement to symmetric angle dimensions. Very useful in revolved parts when you have angled faces, similar to the example here. So for instance, if I want the angle between these, I can select the line and the center line, and there's my symmetric dimension. So those are just a few of the new enhancements to dimensions for this particular release. Let's move on. So my next enhancement is to support for section views, and in particular slice section views and surface bodies. So let's jump into it. Here I have a part that consists of nothing but a surface body. I'm going to go ahead and make a drawing, and we'll drag out, let's say for instance, a right view. And of course we'll do a section view to this. Now the option that I'm referring to is slice section. Now the slice section has only been supported in the past for solid bodies. Now you can do a slice section and see just the areas where it intersects the cutting plane, also on surface bodies. So again, support for a slice section in surface bodies, new for this particular release. My last enhancement for this CADcast is the new zoom to sheet function in drawings. And this one's particularly useful if you have a scenario where you have drawing views off the sheet, or maybe the border is off the sheet. And the problem with this is when you have a scenario like this and you have a drawing view out here in space, when you do a zoom to fit, it's not really much use because the zoom to fit incorporates all those views that are out there in space. So what you'll see is a new command. Here in the heads up toolbar, you'll see zoom to sheet, and like the name implies, it just merely zooms to the sheet rather than all the drawing views and things that may be outside of the sheet. So the new zoom to sheet function you'll see in drawings in SolidWorks 2015. So that does it for part 1 of the new features for drawings and detailing in SolidWorks 2015. For more content, check out our YouTube channel at youtube.com/DDiCAD or our tech blog at ddicad.com/techcenter. Thank you.